It's 6:40 in the evening. You're standing at the checkout counter of a small convenience store with a crumpled $5 bill already in your hand. In your other hand is a cold energy drink, its can covered in tiny drops of condensation. Without saying much, the cashier slides a scratch-off lottery ticket across the counter. $5. You don't stop to think about it. Almost nobody does. $5 feels too small to matter. It's the kind of amount that slips through your fingers without demanding a second thought. It's the price of convenience, of impulse, of avoiding a decision. You head back to your car and use a coin from the cup holder to scratch the ticket. Nothing. No prize. No surprise. Deep down, you expected that outcome anyway. You toss the losing ticket onto the passenger seat beside the other few you've collected this week. Take a long sip from the energy drink and drive home. By tomorrow, you won't even remember spending that money. And that's exactly why $5 is so powerful. It's just enough to disappear without leaving any trace. Keep that $5 bill in your mind, because this story is about spending that exact amount every single day for 40 years. And how that tiny daily choice quietly determines the person you eventually become. You're 25 years old. The next evening, you find yourself at the very same store, the same cashier, the same checkout counter, but this time, something changes. You leave the lottery ticket where it is. You walk past the refrigerated drinks without grabbing one and head back to your car empty-handed. Instead of buying anything, you open an investing app you downloaded the night before. You transfer $5 into a low-cost index fund that tracks the entire stock market. No complicated research, no guessing, just one simple tap. The screen now shows your total investment. $5. It almost feels ridiculous. It looks less like an investment account and more like a child's piggy bank. You even feel a little foolish, like someone planting a single seed in a huge empty field and pretending it's a thriving farm. There's no excitement, no flashing lights, no instant reward, no lucky number waiting to change your life. There's only $5 quietly buying you a tiny ownership stake in hundreds of the world's largest companies. The next day, you do the same thing, and the day after that. Eventually, you automate the process so the money leaves your account before you even have the chance to spend it on snacks, drinks, or anything wrapped in colorful packaging. Every month, about $152 quietly moves into your investment account. Most months, you barely notice it's gone. That's the funny thing about $5. Whether you spend it or invest it, it disappears either way. The only difference is where it ends up. Now you're 26. A full year has gone by. Your investment account has grown to roughly $1,900. Out of that total, around $1,825 came directly from your own deposits. The market added the remaining $75 while you were busy living your life. $75. Honestly, it feels almost disappointing. One afternoon at lunch, a coworker asks how your investing is going. How much did you actually make? He asks. You tell him, about $75. He laughs. Not to be mean, but because the number genuinely sounds insignificant. $75 in a whole year, he says. I can earn that in a single afternoon. And he's right. Every weekday he buys lunch instead of packing it from home. Every evening he stops for a drink at the corner store. Whenever the lottery jackpot gets big enough to make headlines, he buys another scratch ticket. Individually, none of those purchases seem important. Maybe $5 here, another $5 there. Tiny pleasures scattered throughout the week. Yet, if you asked him to list everything he spent that money on 6 months later, he probably couldn't remember most of it. You don't argue. You simply close your laptop. Because after 1 year, the real difference between you and him isn't the extra $75. It's the invisible habit you've built. The money is small. The habit is priceless. Now you're 30 years old. 5 years have passed since that first $5 investment. When you check your account, the balance is sitting at around $11,000. Of that amount, you personally contributed roughly $9,000. Everything beyond that came from time itself. Your account now holds around $11,000, built almost entirely from the countless little purchases you chose not to make. One evening, curiosity gets the better of you, and you calculate what those skipped expenses would have looked like over the past 5 years. Every coffee you passed on, every energy drink you left in the cooler, every impulse purchase you ignored while standing at a checkout counter. Together, they add up to the money now sitting in your investment account. Instead of ending up in a trash bin or being forgotten the next day, those dollars have quietly become part of your future. That same month, your phone buzzes. A friend sends you a screenshot of a cryptocurrency you've never even heard of. The chart looks unbelievable, up 400% in a single week. He tells you he already invested $2,000 and insists you're missing the opportunity of a lifetime. Stop playing it safe, he writes. Your boring index fund makes in a whole year what this coin earns before lunchtime. In one sense, he's absolutely right. His investment is moving much faster than yours, but speed isn't the same as direction. You've seen this story before. It doesn't just remind you of cryptocurrency. It reminds you of standing outside a convenience store with a scratch ticket in your hand. The same promise. Turn a small amount into a fortune overnight. Skip the waiting. Ignore the process. Believe the shortcut. Where you grew up, that promise already had a name. It was called a lottery ticket. You reply with a simple message. I'll pass. He sends back a laughing emoji. Then he buys even more. 3 months later, that coin has lost around 90% of its value. The messages stop. He never brings it up again. Meanwhile, you continue doing something that almost nobody finds exciting. You keep investing the same small amount. You choose the slow road, the boring road, the road where wealth arrives quietly instead of dramatically. Early to bed, slow to become rich. Now you're 35 years old. 10 years have passed. Your investment account has grown to roughly $27,800. Out of that total, you've personally deposited about $18,000. The remaining nearly $10,000 came from simply staying invested and allowing time to do its work. Then, everything changes. The market enters a major decline. News channels flash alarming headlines. Words like market crash dominate every conversation. Within weeks, your portfolio loses nearly 1/3 of its value. On paper, you've lost more money than your annual salary. It's uncomfortable. It feels real. Your friend, the same one who sold everything during the previous downturn, calls you. I knew this was coming, he says proudly. I sold everything. I'm sitting in cash now. It's the safest place to be. You don't argue. You don't try to predict the future. You don't even make a dramatic decision to hold. Instead, you do something much quieter. You simply stop checking the app. The balance falls. The headlines grow louder. Yet every month, the same $152 continues leaving your account automatically. It buys the exact same index fund. Only now, every dollar purchases more shares because prices are lower than they've been in years. You're not fearless. You're not unusually disciplined. In truth, you're simply patient enough to leave things alone. And that ability, to do absolutely nothing when everyone else is panicking, turns out to be one of the rarest skills anyone can have with money. Eventually, the market begins recovering. By the time people feel confident enough to invest again, your quiet monthly habit has already been buying through the lowest prices, long before anyone realized they were the bottom. Now you're 40 years old. 15 years have passed since that first $5 investment. Your account balance has climbed to around $52,600. Over those years, you've contributed approximately $27,000 from your own pocket. For the very first time, something remarkable happens. Your investments are now worth more than the total amount you personally deposited. Read that again. Because this is the moment, everything changes. For years, it felt as though you were pushing a heavy boulder uphill. $15 contribution at a time. Progress seemed painfully slow, but eventually, the slope changes. The boulder begins rolling under its own momentum. Now your job isn't to push harder, it's simply to stay out of its way. That spring, one of your coworkers unexpectedly loses his job. He has no emergency savings, no investments, nothing standing between him and the next missed paycheck. You, on the other hand, have something quietly waiting in the background, an account you've never depended on, money you've never needed to touch. A financial cushion built one small decision at a time, and in that moment, you finally understand something that wasn't obvious 15 years ago. Those daily $5 investments were never just about retirement decades in the future. They were also building protection against the difficult seasons of life, creating a barrier between temporary hardship and lasting financial panic. You never tell your coworker about your investment account. Instead, you quietly pay for his lunch and leave the conversation there. No lecture, no advice, no attempt to prove a point. Sometimes actions speak far more clearly than numbers. Now you're 45 years old. 20 years have passed since you made that first $5 decision. Your investment account has grown to approximately $89,000. Over those 2 decades, you've personally invested around $36,000, adding only $5 at a time. Everything beyond that was created through patience and compound growth. For the first time, something remarkable begins to happen. The annual growth of your portfolio is becoming almost as large as the amount you're contributing each year. It's as if your investments have quietly taken on a second job, one you never had to interview for or supervise. That summer, you attend a high school reunion. One former classmate arrives in a luxury car worth more than your yearly salary. Another spends most of the evening proudly showing off an expensive designer watch. You pull up in the same car you've owned for the last 8 years. It's fully paid off. It doesn't impress anyone, but it also doesn't send you a monthly bill. It owes you nothing. During the evening, you run into the coworker who laughed years ago when you celebrated earning $75. Some habits never changed. He still buys lunch every workday. He still grabs lottery tickets whenever the jackpot gets everyone's attention. Half joking, he asks. You smile. Yeah, I never stopped. Curious, he asks how much is in the account now. You tell him. For a brief moment, the table falls completely silent. Not because you wanted attention, and certainly not because you enjoyed the reaction. You quickly change the subject. Because the power of that daily $5 was never found in making noise. Its greatest strength was that it never needed to. Now you're 50 years old. 25 years have passed. Your investment account is worth roughly $144,000. Over that entire period, you've contributed only about $45,000 from your own earnings. The remaining wealth was created without overtime, side hustles, or lucky breaks. It simply came from allowing your money to keep working long after you stopped thinking about it. Around this time, the headlines begin telling a familiar story. They report that many people your age have almost no retirement savings. Experts warn that financial security is slipping farther out of reach for the average worker. The numbers look frightening. Here's what's interesting. You are an average worker. You earned a normal salary. You paid rent just like everyone else. You sat in the same traffic, worked the same hours, faced the same bills. The difference wasn't that you earned more. The difference was that 25 years earlier, you quietly chose not to buy a cold drink and a scratch ticket. Instead, you redirected those few dollars into one of the most ordinary, boring investment funds available. Your friends speak about retirement as though it's an unavoidable cliff waiting at the end of the road. You think about it differently. To you, retirement feels more like the changing seasons, something that arrives naturally because you prepared for it long before it appeared. You don't say that out loud, though. By now you've learned an important lesson. Real wealth rarely announces itself. The loudest money is usually the money trying to prove something. The strongest money grows in silence. Now you're 55 years old. 30 years have passed. Your portfolio has reached approximately $226,000. Across 3 decades, you've personally invested about $55,000. One tiny contribution after another, amounts so small they could easily disappear between couch cushions. Everything beyond that, over $170,000, wasn't created through harder work. It was created by time. You simply gave time enough space to do what it has always done. This is the year when the mathematics changes forever. In a strong market, your investments now earn more on their own than you could realistically contribute, even if you doubled your monthly deposits. You've reached a remarkable point. You're no longer carrying the investment. The investment is carrying itself. The machine you've spent decades building has become more powerful than the effort required to build it. You don't brag about the balance. You don't discuss it with your children. You don't mention it to coworkers. You certainly don't bring it up with the friend who once called you a coward for investing slowly. Your wealth remains invisible, hidden from nearly everyone. And perhaps that's exactly why it had the freedom to grow uninterrupted. Now you're 65 years old. 40 years have passed since the evening you walked away from a $5 scratch ticket. Today, your investment account is worth approximately $531,000. Take a moment to really think about the numbers, because they tell the entire story. After 40 years, your investment account has grown to roughly $500,000. Now look at where that money actually came from. Across 4 decades, investing just $5 a day, you personally contributed only about $73,000. The remaining $458,000 wasn't earned through overtime. It didn't come from winning the lottery. It wasn't the result of finding the perfect stock or predicting the market. It was simply growth. Money that quietly multiplied while you were living your life. You never worked directly for those dollars. You never watched them arrive. You barely noticed the small amounts leaving your account in the first place. There was no extraordinary talent involved. No lucky break. No secret investment strategy. No magical shortcut. All you really did was make the same simple decision over and over again. You skipped an energy drink. You ignored a scratch ticket. You invested those $5 instead. Then you repeated that ordinary choice thousands of times across 40 years. The money sat patiently inside one of the most boring investments imaginable while time quietly did all the heavy lifting. That was the entire strategy. There was never a hidden second step. There was never another secret waiting to be discovered. No one was ever going to hand you that extra $458,000 any faster. The waiting wasn't a flaw in the system. The waiting was the system. Time was the price you had to pay, and very few people are willing to invest in something whose reward takes decades to fully arrive. The coworker who started alongside you retires the very same year. For 40 years, the two of you earned similar salaries. You worked the same kinds of jobs. He was dependable, hardworking, rarely missed a day of work. The difference wasn't effort. It wasn't intelligence. It certainly wasn't income. It was simply what happened to $5 each day. Over 40 years, he also spent approximately $73,000, the exact same amount. His money became coffee, energy drinks, fast food, lottery tickets, small purchases that felt enjoyable in the moment but gradually disappeared without leaving anything behind. You both stood at the same convenience store counters, held the same $5 bills, faced the same decision. Evening after evening, he enjoyed thousands of small comforts along the way, and eventually retired with his pension. You enjoyed many of those same moments too, but you also retired with an investment account worth more than $500,000, quietly waiting in the background like an invisible partner that had been working beside you every single day. If someone tried to identify the exact moment your financial lives separated, they wouldn't find one. Because it never happened all at once. There wasn't one dramatic decision that changed everything. Instead, there was one tiny question asked repeatedly, every evening, every payday, every small purchase. Over time, those tiny answers stopped being individual choices. They became habits.